What's up, guys? So today's video, I have a question from one of you guys in the comments. Remember, if you guys have any questions, leave it in the comments. The best questions get answered on YouTube because it helps me and it helps you. So hey, also remember, it's just advice. That's about it. Should I train if I don't compete? I want to compete, but I feel like I'm too out of shape for it. Should I keep training if I can't compete right now? I want to compete in the future, but I just don't feel ready for it now. I think this is a really hard thing, to be honest, because I don't know what it means for you to feel ready to compete. Even sometimes I've had this problem where I don't compete unless I've had a long camp, but I've gotten a lot better recently just to be like, all right, I don't need to do a camp every time that I compete because number one, camps suck. They're hard. They kind of burn you out. And number two, the reality of most jiu-jitsu matches is they don't require as much cardio as you would think. Obviously, there's like exceptions if it becomes a more scrappy, scrambly wrestling match. But for the most part, jiu-jitsu is a slower paced thing. It's not like wrestling where cardio is as much of a factor, especially if you have a pretty decent submission game or just passing, pinning, et cetera game. So it's like in wrestling where 30 seconds in wrestling, for example, is a lot different than 30 seconds in a jiu-jitsu match. So I don't think you need to be in crazy good cardio shape. Although I guess I don't really know what that means. But moving on, let's talk about once you do start competing, because you said you want to compete, how do you get better at competing? This is like the real big question, right? I think the difference between competing and practice is that competition is a high stress environment. There is a higher risk of injury due to the intensity of it. And there's a lot more nerves because you can lose. Like in practice, we talk about you win or you learn or whatever. That's true because you literally, there's no ref in practice, right? So the only way to lose is if there's a final result with a referee holding up your hand, right? So one of the hardest parts about competition is that even though lots of people don't want to admit this, I agree that injury risk is one of the big things, but there's injury risk in training too, even more so I would say in training than there is in competition. The biggest risk is attack on the ego, where we're standing across the mat from another person and they're getting their hand raised while our hand's down and we're pouting and we're sad. This is one of the big differences between competition and practice that lots of people don't like to talk about. It's actually, I would say, the number one difference. And the number two difference, I would say, is the fact that people are actually watching. Sometimes, depending, most of the time there's 10, 12 mats out and no one's watching you except for your coaches and the coaches of your opponent. But it's a high stress environment. There's a much higher risk of injury and there's a lot of nerves and anxiety about losing. I even think the anxiety about losing is more than the anxiety about injury, because if people took the time to actually think about the risk of injury in actual training sessions, it's really high. You know, it's more comparable or worse than competition. But whatever, I guess in competition you also have the crazies who are going to try to attack you. Let's say there's a 100% chance that you're going to be injury free. You know, that's not real, right? But let's say it was. In order to actually get better at competing, it's not about you just doing a bunch of cardio. It's not about you doing that assault bike twice a week. That's what I do, right? Like whenever I'm actually preparing for something big, I'm doing the assault bike a lot. But I know that that's not necessarily going to help me directly in my competition. It does help with an explosive style. It's not going to directly impact my ability to compete. A lot of times, the things that make competition a lot easier are just reps in competition. It's doing those reps, understanding, oh, I felt bad because my warm-up was like this, or oh, I felt bad because my diet was like this on the day of competition or the week leading up to competition, or oh, I felt bad because I trained too much or too little the week of competition. And it's like all those things, you only learn all those things when you compete more, right? It's like my experience is going to be a lot different than your experience. It's just like people will be like, well, what do you eat on the day of competition? It really doesn't matter what I eat because it's different. Our bodies are different. You know, I'm 250, maybe you're 150. You know, my body needs different things than your body needs. Who knows, right? So I think one of the biggest things, ambulance, big ambulance guy here in Kentucky. But I think one of the biggest things is you have to experience competition to get better at competing, you know, and I don't just mean like the stepping on the mat and rolling with another person. I mean all of it. Like I said, the warm up, the waking up early to go do the competition, the cool down, hydrating in between matches, fueling your body in between matches, learning how to lose, learning how to win and not be too high on your wins. This is a really big one. It's like I've had a friend who won a really big wrestling match and then he lost immediately following that really big wrestling win because he was too high on himself. He beat the number one seed and then in the next match he lost to like a nobody because he's like so hyped up from that win. That's like a skill, right? It's the skill of competing is how can you be as emotionless as possible going through a competition, win or lose. I mean, there's so much more that I could talk about. The next thing would be, is that like nerves don't go away. This is like a big misconception. I think you just learn how to handle them better. I competed last week. I'm about to compete again next week. And it's like, you're always nervous. You look up film of people, you watch other people compete. You get to the mat, you warm up, and you're nervous. The first match usually sucks the worst for me. Every single time, the first match is the worst. You know, my lungs are cold, they're stiff. No matter how hard I warm up, I feel shaky, I feel weird. I get exhausted a lot faster in the first match. And I think I've gotten a lot better with my breathing, my actual warm up to help like mitigate it, to try to open up my lungs, to try to like release the pressure on myself, to kind of try to surrender the outcome. Realistically, the nerves don't go away. You kind of just get a lot better at handling it. And with the more reps you get, I would say, I don't know the science of it, but I feel like you're both your mind and your body get a lot more used to it. So you're like, okay, I've been here before, and that plays a lot. That's why lots of guys with a lot more experience will lose to younger guys who are more athletic, maybe even traditionally more technical. You saw this at ADCC, you saw this at CJI with some guys where it's like some of the vets, like the older guys, were winning matches with guys that were more popular, more young, had fancier techniques and stuff, but they gritted it out. They won because experience is probably the most valuable thing to help you with competition. No matter how many moves you know, or how strong you are, how fast you are, et cetera, et cetera. I think experience tends to show as the biggest outlying factor for champions. It's not always the case, but for the most part, it is. Again, just kind of closing the video out, it's like, if you want to compete, you have to accept the injury risk, you know, because I hear this all the time. I don't want to compete or I want to compete, but I'm scared because I'm afraid that I might get hurt. Yep, you're right. Okay. It's like, are we going to just keep having this circular conversation? Because what do you want me to do? You want me to convince you that you're not going to get hurt? Because that's a lie. You might get hurt. You might not get hurt. Who knows? If you want to compete, you say you want to compete, you just got to go compete. You just kind of got to go compete. You got to do it. You might get hurt. There's not much else to say there. Either accept it or don't compete, and that's cool. It's okay whether you're not, which brings me to my last part, that competing is not for everyone, right? You should do what feels right, and you should ask yourself, why am I competing? If you're so scared of losing, so scared of getting hurt, then it's probably just not for you. It's kind of a harsh thing to say, but there's not really a better way to say it. It's like, you can't always question it, and if you're always questioning it, then you probably shouldn't be doing it. And I think it's good to take a little bit of time before you go out and compete and say, why am I competing? Am I doing this just to be a hobbyist, to kind of go test my courage? Am I trying to become a professional athlete? Am I trying to prepare for another big tournament that's going to help me become a professional athlete? Am I trying to do this to sell instructionals or do seminars? Why are you competing? It's really up to you to answer that. And if you don't have a good reason, then I personally don't see a reason to compete. If you truly don't have a good reason, you have a 9-to-5 job, you have kids, you have a mortgage. If you don't have a really good reason to compete, I genuinely don't know why. For me, I always say it's like, competing is an insanely great test of courage, and it's not about the accolades, because I already have enough of those, right? Like, more accolades aren't going to help anything, right? It's not going to help me sell more seminars or sell more instructionals, but it's more rather like a test of courage and embracing those really shitty nerves that we talked about before. But if you don't have like a good reason to compete, maybe just don't compete. I don't think competing's for everyone. Just like we've heard the saying, Jiu-Jitsu's for everyone. I don't actually completely agree with that. It's a pretty blanket statement. Kind of went on a bit of a ramble here. At the end of the day, the main question was, should I train if I don't compete? Yes, you don't have to compete. It's not a must-have thing, right? But if you want to compete in the future, you just might as well compete now, all right? There's never going to be like a perfect time with your cardio. I know I kind of went about and kind of answered different questions that weren't directly your question, but I don't know. That's just the answer I could give. With that being said, guys, if you guys want to learn a little bit more about my competition-proven techniques, takedowns, etc., you guys can check out all of my instructional videos at brandonreed3x.com/store. I have tons of different instructionals ranging from hand fighting to duck hunters and more. But yeah, hopefully you guys check those out and enjoy them. And again, if you have any questions, leave it in the comments below. Thanks.